positions. In each case, we believe the tanks was taken out. We're having to keep our heads down because there is still a fair amount of shooting about us. But again, we have seen the road signs, and the road signs indicate that we are very close to Baghdad, and as I said earlier, just a few kilometers from the Baghdad International Airport. Again, earlier this morning, about 4 hours ago, 3.5 hours ago, the Iraqis sent out a company of tanks to try to intercept or overrun the U.S. Army's 3rd Squadron, 7th Cavalry. 10 tanks were knocked out of action then, 6 or 7 by the armored vehicles in the Apache troop, and another 3 by close air support from the Air Force or the Navy. They stay pretty high up, so we can't see what they were. But again, the Iraqis have put up more resistance in terms of use of Iraqi tanks than we have seen in over a week now. That being the case, the Iraqi counterpunch has been totally ineffectual, and again, those 3 tanks which tried to move against the 7th Cavalry just a few minutes ago have been put out of action. Aaron?
It's one thing to be ineffectual, Walt. It's another thing to not pose any danger at all. And just reading between the lines here, there are still plenty of risks out there, even if the ultimate outcome is clear.
That's true, Aaron, and every one of these tank commanders with their heads out of the turret, and the commanders of the Bradley fighting vehicles, the NCOs, again, their heads sticking out of the turret, surveying the battle scene, is a constant target for snipers, and you never can tell if the Iraqis were able to get off a random shot which would fall close enough to do damage to either the soldiers in the 7th Cavalry or their vehicles. That has not happened so far, although there have been times over the past week and a half when we've been in combat with the 7th Cavalry that we have seen rocket-propelled grenades bouncing at the feet of the Army's vehicles. And yesterday, the CNN vehicle had a machine gun striking in the dirt on one side of the car, and small arms fire from AK-47s striking on the dirt of the other. So while the Iraqis are not able to take out or do serious damage to the U.S. units, they are shooting at them, and as long as there are bullets whizzing through the air, there's always the risk that someone could get hurt. Aaron?
There is indeed. We saw, to stay with us, Walt, we saw pictures not long ago, both live and tape, of the airport itself, of the Americans moving into the airport itself, trying to take control of as much of it as they can. They're trying to take control of it without destroying it. In both the small picture and the big picture, that is one clear message of how this campaign is being run. Obviously, no campaign, no war can be run without damage being done to human beings or buildings, but they are trying, here in the case of the airport, not to damage these runways. They have to be used. They will be needed to bring more troops in at some point, to bring humanitarian aid in at some point. And so as they move through the airport, this was an incident a while back, a couple of hours ago, that we actually watched live unfold. An Iraqi, we don't know his connection to either the airport or the military or anything else, is confronted by an American soldier. You'll see his buddy come up now, the American buddy come up, will frisk him down while the other soldier keeps a steady aim on this man. They make sure he's not carrying any weaponry, and then they will, in a matter of moments, march him off to a fate we do not know. Whether he was held, we do know that he wasn't handcuffed, at least not in the scene that you're witnessing. This took place just after about 10 o'clock Eastern time tonight, and they kind of push him on out of the way. All this at the airport. One soldier went to the microphone and to a microphone, and these were shot, I believe, by APTN, and said, everything's fine here. Our guys are in good shape. Their morale is good. And as you see on your screen, Reuters reporting that an American officer says, quote, "We control the airport, the officer, Colonel John Peabody of the 3rd Infantry Division." We'll take a break, and our coverage continues in a moment.
You're gonna love this new Quick Rent at National Car Rental.
When you get to the airport, they let you choose your own car.
Whatever make and model you want.
Whatever color you want.
You can walk right past the counter.
And you don't stand in any lines.
All you need is a major credit card and access to the internet. You rent online at nationalcard.com.
They ought to call it quick and easy.
Bypass the counter.
You don't have to stand in line. Choose your own car.
Click, click, click on the computer.
It's all about me. Rent, huh?
Choose the rental car company that lets you choose your own car. Quick rent at nationalcar.com.
CNN puts you alongside the troops with soldiers.
Bang, boom, boom, and then there came small arms fire.
With sailors.
6 U.S. Navy warships were involved in the Tomahawk strikes.
With airmen.
There goes a plane taking off now.
With Marines.
What they want to do is try to take this facility intact.
Plus, CNN joins forces with top news organizations and our network of affiliates to put more reporters in the region to keep you informed. No one gets you closer than CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Long before the war began, Newsnight, this program fell in love with still photographers in many ways, and so this now is the latest in our series on still photographers. Tonight, the photographer is Kate Brooks on assignment for Time magazine in northern Iraq, where Kurds are fighting Iraqis. They are also fighting hunger, thirst, and fear.
My name's Kate Brooks, and I'm a photographer working for Time magazine in northern Iraq. I came here 2 months ago, and I'm here to cover the war. It's about telling the truth, documenting history, and being witnesses for the rest of the world. Kurdistan is far more developed than I would have ever imagined. People here have a real self-determination and have worked hard to rebuild their lives. There were a number of families from Cham Shamal and also a couple from Kirkuk who fled their homes and took refuge in rocks. And the families have put plastic over rocks or in between rocks and made temporary shelter in fear of fighting around their villages. The main story for us has been the battle with Ansar. The issue of Ansar in Kurdistan has affected everybody who's in Kurdistan, those of us who are just here for a few months and the Kurds who live here. That was at the Academy for Peshmerga. The man who is standing there in front of the models was a Iraqi defector, and basically it was a mock construction of various front lines. Here it's a mountainous, hilly terrain. The cadets in that situation are being taught about firing distance. The front lines around Halabja have been accessible. For example, last weekend there was the U.S. Special Forces and the Kurdish Peshmerga forces were battling with Ansar. The body is one of Ansar's men, and that was taken in the hills while the U.S. Special Forces and Peshmerga operation was underway. They wouldn't have been able to rid the area of Ansar without the U.S. assistance. The feeling here is, why is this taken so long? Not, why is this happening? So there is a great hope amongst the Kurdish people that they will be free of Saddam Hussein.
The pictures of Kate Brooks for Time magazine and Newsnight producer Amanda Townsend put them together. We'll take a break here. Darren Kagan updates the day's headlines, and our coverage continues in a moment.
You know what it takes to reach your goals in life. You're ready to meet any challenge, no matter how great. It takes persistence, performance, and strength. That's why you choose Pacific Life. For insurance, annuities, and investments, rely on the strength of Pacific Life.
You decided. Once again, CNN is #1. For trust and experience, Americans choose CNN as the most credible news source. More than MSNBC or Fox News. More than any network, newspaper, or magazine. CNN is the most trusted name in news.
I'm Darren Kagan, live from Kuwait City. Let's take a look at what is happening at this hour. There is a dramatic nighttime firefight at the Baghdad airport. That is where Iraqi troops tried desperately to stop U.S. forces in a battle to seize this key site. It's unclear if the U.S. has full control of the airport, just 12 miles from Baghdad. Not far from that airport, the 307th Cavalry engaged in a tank battle, which proved costly for Iraqi troops. 400 of them were killed. It's now about 10 a.m. in Baghdad, but earlier this morning, the loudspeakers for the Muslim call to prayers were silenced by a power outage. Not clear if the electricity was knocked out by U.S. bombs or if it was turned off by the Iraqi regime. The Pentagon says coalition forces did not target the city's power system. The U.S. House of Representatives overwhelmingly approved a budget proposal to pay the initial cost of the war in Iraq. The tab is about $80 billion. Earlier in the evening, the Senate unanimously passed its own version of an $80 billion war budget. Today will be another day in the operating room for rescued U.S. POW Jessica Lynch, who is said to be in great spirits despite her condition. Her father says she underwent surgery to relieve pressure on her back on Thursday. Today's operations will address her broken limbs, like her broken legs, that she supposedly suffered when she was shot during that attack. And just for a moment to get away from all the intense war news, let's take a look at an Associated Press study about Major League Baseball. It shows the average player's salary rose to over $2.5 million this season. The New York Yankees have the top team payroll in the game, $150 million a year. The Tampa Bay Devil Rays have the smallest, $19.6 million. And here's a good comparison for you. Baseball's highest paid player, Alex Rodriguez of the Texas Rangers, pulls down $22 million a year. That is more than the entire Tampa Bay team. Those are the headlines at this hour. Aaron, as I toss it back to you, I hope we're going to have time in the next half hour. I was able to cover a really interesting rally here in Kuwait City last night, probably the only place in the Arab world where you will see a pro-war rally. Some good pictures to bring you in the next half hour.
Thank you, Darren. I hope we have time for that, too. We'll see how things shake out. It certainly hasn't been the day or the night that we thought it would be. As we came on the air around 10 o'clock Eastern Time, American forces were just formally getting control of the airport, Saddam International Airport, just outside of Baghdad. As we have said a number of times now, this is important strategically. It is also important psychologically to the regime and to the people the regime controls, and both matter in the context of the days ahead. What the people of the Iraqi capital do, whether they follow what their government tells them to do or whether they stay out of the way so that the coalition, which in this case really is just the Americans, can come in, will determine how difficult, how bloody the end game is. Excuse me. That's a small picture of what has been a complicated day, not always an easy day for the coalition. We want to, for those of you who just may be joining us, give you a broad look at how the day began. It ended at the airport. As the lights were turned out in Baghdad, intentionally perhaps by the Iraqi government, American troops moved ever closer to the capital. Some units, according to the Pentagon, are at the city's main international airport. And air assaults, too, continued to hit the city.
There's a rocket coming our way, firing loose over the shoulder. There's a rocket, Charlie, over our right shoulder.
The Army's 3rd Division, 7th Cavalry, with whom CNN's Walter Rogers is embedded, crept nearer and nearer to Baghdad. Tanks and armored vehicles drove past the wreckage of Iraqi tanks, largely unopposed, much to the satisfaction of the Secretary of Defense.
They've taken several outlying areas and are closer to the center of the Iraqi capital than many American commuters are from their downtown offices.
A statement denied, no matter how improbably, by the Iraqi Minister of Information just before the power went out.
They are not near Baghdad. Don't believe them.
Could they be trapped? Could they be trapped?
They are trapped everywhere in the country.
To the south of the Iraqi capital, elements of the 101st Airborne found themselves momentarily trapped in the crowded streets of Najaf. With the gold dome of the Ali Mosque in the distance, a mosque sacred to Shiite Muslims, angry crowds surrounded a small patrol. They believed the Americans were heading for the mosque. They were not. They were en route instead to a meeting with the mosque's leader. CNN's Ryan Chilcote was in the middle.
No one apparently told the crowd of the soldiers' intentions, and as you can probably see from this video, complete chaos ensued.
The troops withdrew and the meeting rescheduled. To the east of Baghdad, not far from the Iraqi city of Kut, Marines took away stacks of rifles after they moved through the town. And to ensure they would not be used again, an American tank went to work. From U.S. Central Command, some new and intriguing pictures. Here, American Special Forces raid one of Saddam Hussein's many palaces about 50 miles north of Baghdad. Nobody home. But commanders say some documents were seized, and American troops also seized an important dam before it could be destroyed by Iraqi troops. New video, too, of that rescue of Private First Class Jessica Lynch. You can see her being carried down the stairs of that hospital where she was found, then loaded into the waiting helicopter. Her family says she is doing as well as can be expected.
I actually assisted in that particular operation. The mother was also operated on for a significant abdominal injury.
And a side story of the war. In a field hospital in central Iraq, CNN's Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who is a neurosurgeon, was called in to help when an Iraqi infant was wounded during an incident at an American checkpoint. Tragically, the child later died. Northern Iraq saw more fighting. Here, a Kurdish patrol, accompanied by a small group of U.S. Special Forces, found themselves in a firefight with Iraqi soldiers. American planes were called in on the Iraqi positions. And at the opposite end of the country, in Basra, the British were probing Iraqi defenses inside the city, but as of yet have not entered. And about those 2 American aircraft lost yesterday, there is a suggestion now that the F-18 off the carrier Kitty Hawk may have been downed by friendly fire, a Patriot missile. And the cause of that Black Hawk helicopter crash continues to be investigated. That's a broad look at the day. This came across our desk a little while ago. I haven't been able to get it in. We've got a moment here. We've hardly talked much about the story of Private First Class Jessica Lynch, who continues to recover at a hospital in Germany. And there's been more reporting, and the reporting here is actually being done by an Army sergeant who's, I gather, with Armed Forces newspaper. It turns out in his reporting, and there's some support in this, that this never would have happened, this rescue never would have happened were it not for an Iraqi lawyer in Nasiriyah who had gone to the hospital to visit his wife, who was in the hospital, and he became aware that there were more soldiers, more security there than normal, and he asked why, and was told because there was an American female prisoner being held there. And the man then walked 10 miles down the road to where the American troops were and told them of this, and the Americans asked him, American Marines asked him to go back and be with her and gather more information. At one point, he describes being in a room with Private Lynch and some of her people who had taken her captive, and they're talking about amputating her leg, and he leans over to her and says in English, "Don't worry, it won't happen," and she smiles, according to this account. But apparently none of this would have happened, this dramatic rescue, were it not for an Iraqi citizen who made it possible. To the south we go, to Baghdad. Marines of the 1st Battalion, the 7th Marines, have crossed the Tigris River and turned toward Baghdad. CNN's Martin Savage was with them as they fought their way through the city of Al-Kut.
As the unit moves in, they find an old city teeming with life, and all seems calm. But that will change. On the outskirts of the city, as they close on a Republican Guard position, the men of Charlie Company come under attack. Small arms fire and rocket-propelled grenades. The Marines return fire with their M16s and the heavier guns on the APCs. A blazing gun battle erupts.
And get fire caps right now. Somebody give me a grenade on those fuckers. Let's go.
At first, there is chaos and shouting. But soon, training kicks in as the source of the gunfire is located and support fire is called in. Rockets, artillery, and air power strike. Charlie Company rolls through a now deserted Republican Guard base. The troops behind them will search it more carefully, but Charlie can't wait. The second objective, an Iraqi airbase, lies just ahead. On the outskirts, Iraqi bunkers, already hit by artillery, boil like volcanoes, self-destructing as the ammunition inside them explodes. The men waste no time watching. They move on, pausing only to open fire on Iraqi radar arrays. Eventually, the Marines push out on foot, and this is the most dangerous part of any mission. Moving in teams, the squads probe Iraqi bunkers on the airbase's perimeter.
Check for traps.
Once on the base itself, they make forced entries into the complex's many buildings. Doors that can't be kicked open are shot until their locks give way. The first weapons are found.
We have a AK-47. Not loaded.
Where did you find them?
I found these right underneath these trees. We've been finding a lot of these weapons abandoned.
Offices are searched, offering a wealth of documents. The base is empty, but the troops discover an armory stacked floor to ceiling with weapons. They carry them out by the armload like bundles of wood. So many guns, the challenge becomes how to destroy them all. But soon the might of Saddam Hussein's military is ground beneath the weight of tank treads. The job becomes an assembly line of destruction. What cannot be crushed is simply doused with gasoline and set on fire. Then the Marines leave. Martin Savage, CNN, with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, Al Qut, Iraq.
Traveling farther south now, where British forces continue moving closer and closer, though patiently, to Basra, the country's second largest city, trying to convince the citizens that they come offering security and friendship and food and water. The story from British Pool reporter Tim Ewart.
There was more gunfire around Basra today as British troops moved inexorably towards the city centre. Snipers claimed 3 kills, hitting Iraqi artillery controllers 700 meters away. And Royal Engineers worked under fire to douse oil pipelines set ablaze by retreating Iraqi troops.
This is your country, and we don't want to take it, we want to give it back to you.
In nearby Azabaya, the commander of British forces was on a personal mission to win hearts and minds.
The reception we got here was a hail of bullet and rocket attacks. We can now come here on our feet. We talk to the people. The reception has been excellent everywhere I've been.
But at Azabaya Hospital, the prevailing mood remains one of fear and uncertainty. A mood captured by the hospital's director. Saddam Hussein is my president, he told me.
For how long do you think?
I don't know.
But until then, you will keep his photograph?
Unless it is drawn by force.
Whereupon a British officer promptly removed the presidential portrait that adorned the director's office.
British troops control the streets of Azabaya, but not yet the hearts and minds of the people. Iraqis are living with an invading army, but Saddam Hussein is still their president. For the moment, they don't know what the future will hold.
As Basra burned, these fighters opted for surrender. The fall of their city seems inevitable. The timing is in British hands. Tim Ewart, ITV News, Southern Iraq.
From the south to the north, we'll be joined by CNN's Brent Sadler. A break first. Our coverage continues in a moment.
It's not easy to have a career and a family, but my job makes it a lot easier to do both. I think my company takes family very seriously, and they'll help you achieve anything you want. And it doesn't matter what you want to do or where you want to go, the possibilities are absolutely endless at Walmart. I hope to set a good example for my boys that they can go out and achieve absolutely anything. My name is Margaret. I'm a district manager in charge of 7 stores, and I've been with Walmart for 11 years.
at 7:42 a.m., a once-in-a-lifetime business deal will arrive in this office. At 2:06 p.m., a letter of credit worth 3 million euros will move across these lines. And at 3 p.m., 24,000 computer chips will leave this distribution center. Only one company in the world is synchronized enough to make all these things happen. UPS. Commerce. Synchronized.
Every night at 8 Eastern, CNN takes you live from the front lines. Paul Hassan and Wolf Blitzer show you the day's events, what happened, when, and what it all means. In just 1 hour, CNN brings it home. Live from the front lines, 8 Eastern.
We spent most of the night from Baghdad south. We'll go to northern Iraq. Much has happened there since we last talked to CNN's Brent Sadler, and Brent joins us now. Brent, good morning.
Hi, good morning, Aaron. That startling push on Saddam Hussein International Airport is being hailed by Iraqi Kurdish leaders here as passing a critical threshold in the war to defeat Saddam Hussein. Those same leaders are also saying that the Baghdad regime could collapse like a house of cards, especially if more pressure is put on Saddam Hussein's army in the north of Iraq, mainly defending those key cities of Kirkuk and Mosul. Meanwhile, one of the top Iraqi Kurdish leaders has received a direct warning to stay out of the fight. This is the Iraqi Kurdish leader. Saddam Hussein is trying to turn against the US-led invasion, urging veteran guerrilla commander Jalal Talabani to abandon his armed support for the coalition. Mr. Talabani, though, is turning a deaf ear, meeting the needs of his American allies instead, working out new ways in which Iraq's armed opposition groups can help support the war. For Saddam Hussein, he has an uncompromising return message.
He wants to persuade me not to join actively with the American forces. Second, a threat, a kind, if you do it, you'll hold responsibilities and consequences will be very bad, something like this.
Are you listening?
I'm listening to his word, but I'm replying him very well that please resign and escape and rescue Iraqi people by your resignation.
No one here expects the Iraqi leader to surrender power that easily, so Iraq's opposition holds a council of war, mapping out detailed proposals to push for a second front to smash Saddam Hussein's army in the north, already on the run from many frontline positions.
We, the Iraqi people, together with the American liberators and the British liberators, we can achieve the task of getting rid of Saddam Hussein and his terrorist allies.
It's a strategy that's already worked on a smaller scale last week, when US Special Forces and Peshmerga Kurdish fighters wiped out Islamic extremists in a joint offensive. And perhaps explains why these American war planners now seem to be listening closely to the ideas of their armed, mainly Kurdish, Iraqi allies. I also understand, Aaron, that some of the top commanders from the Iraqi Kurds and other opposition groups are going to Central Command to discuss this planning further. The Iraqi opposition wants to get into the fight. It also wants to get into the cities in north of Iraq to be able to try and attempt to bring about uprisings, to get the people of Iraq to understand it's not just American liberators and British liberators moving into Iraq, it's Iraqis going hand in hand with them. And that's the message they want to get through from here. Aaron.
This is a very simple question. Are we to believe that this man you just profiled talked directly to Saddam Hussein, and when did this conversation take place?
Just backtrack a little bit, Aaron. 48 hours ago, Mohammed Saeed al-Sahaf, the Iraqi information minister, in one of his live press conferences, read out a message from Saddam Hussein directing those warnings, that attempt to turn Talabani through that press conference. It wasn't direct ear to ear, it was through the information minister. Talabani responded, and you know the rest.
I got it. Brent, thank you very much. Brent Sadler, who is dealing with the northern part of Iraq. Reem Brahimi keeps track of events in Baghdad, though she is no longer allowed to be in Baghdad. She, along with Nick Robertson and their crews, were expelled, so Reem is keeping an eye on Baghdad from Amman, Jordan, and working the phones. It's nice to see you this morning.
Same here, Aaron. Well, as you can tell by the pictures we're going to show you, a lot of explosions over the Iraqi capital at night, just as U.S. forces were making their approach to Saddam International Airport on the outskirts of Baghdad. It's about 10 kilometers west of Baghdad. It's just a 25-minute drive. On your way from the city to the airport, you pass a huge presidential palace belonging to President Saddam Hussein. Definitely a key strategic area that's been taken there by the coalition forces. It will allow them probably to use it as a staging ground to launch operations from there. Also, it will be useful to be allow them to bring in some humanitarian supplies and be able to channel them directly through the city. That said, there's still a lot to do. A lot of questions over what's happening in Baghdad. Well, we understand from our sources, Aaron, that civilians are not able to leave the Iraqi capital. The Iraqi capital has been, all the checkpoints around Baghdad have been closed. It's also been in the dark since Wednesday 9 p.m. local time. Electricity was cut off, not clear whether deliberately by the Iraqi authorities or whether the result of a missile affecting the electricity grid. But definitely the big question now, as the rhetoric that's being propagated by the Iraqi government through Iraqi TV starts to be at odds with the realities on the ground. Well, the big question now is what happens next. Aaron?
Looking, I'm not sure if you can see these pictures or not. We're looking at Baghdad now. Walt Rogers not long ago described it as a blue sky day, but there is this haze over the city that is the smoke from the bombing and all that is going on at the airport. Reem, it is inconceivable, isn't it, that the people of that city don't know that their government is not telling them the truth when it says the Americans are not near.
Well, very possible indeed, Aaron. People in Baghdad do not have access to satellite dishes or to international news, except some of them through international radio stations, and they would be spreading the word probably. So despite what they're being told on Iraqi TV, a lot of people will have a pretty good idea that the US forces have taken Saddam International Airport. That said, there would still be fear of even maybe for some of them going out or manifesting any change in their behavior for the moment until they know for sure what's happening. They've been given very strict instructions by members of the ruling Ba'ath Party not to leave their homes once the campaign began. And of course now they're just going to wait it out and see what happens, especially after President Saddam Hussein came out on Iraqi TV and said that he was calling on people to fight with their hands, but also indicating we haven't used yet a third of our forces to fight yet, indicating maybe there's still a lot of surprises left in Baghdad. Aaron?
Reem, thank you. Reem Rahimi in Amman, Jordan, keeping track of the events in Baghdad. You can see the Iraqi capital on this Friday morning. You can only imagine, can't you? There were 5 million or so residents of that city. What they must be thinking on this Friday. They must know, they must hear the sounds coming from locations like that, only 12 or 14 miles away from them, that the American-led army, the American coalition, and these are all American troops now, the British are far to the south, are knocking at the door. We'll take a break. Our coverage continues in a moment.
You're gonna love this new Quick Rent at National Car Rental. When you get to the airport, they let you choose your own car. Whatever make and model you want.
Whatever color you want.
You can walk right past the counter. And you don't stand in any lines.
All you need is a major credit card and access to the internet. You rent online at nationalcar.com.
They ought to call it quick and easy.
Bypass the counter.
You don't have to stand in line. Choose your own car. Click, click, click on the computer.
It's all about me. Rent, huh?
Choose the rental car company that lets you choose your own car. Quick Rent at nationalcar.com.
The war in Iraq continues, and no one takes you closer than CNN, live throughout the day. Stay with CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Are you tired of going through this when you go fishing? Are you frustrated with this unorganized mess? Well, attention anglers, from novice to pro, here's the answer. Totem Pole. Weighing less than 2 pounds, Totem Pole is lightweight, compact, and durable. Constructed of rust-resistant material, Totem Pole will last a lifetime. And it floats. Totem Pole will organize 5 rods and reels without that tangled mess. The padded shoulder strap allows your hands to be free to carry other gear. It comes with a mounting clip providing storage and protection for your valuable rods and reels, all for only $37.95. Totem Pole is ideal for pier, jetty, boat, or bank fishermen, and it makes a great gift. Totem Pole, the ultimate fishing companion. And as a special offer, the first 100 callers will receive Totem Pole for only $27.95. That's a $10 savings. So call now, toll free, 1-800-646-5574.
CNN,
the most trusted name in news, is what he meant to say. Time to check morning papers from around the country and perhaps around the world. We'll see how it goes. Pretty much the same lead, to be honest, no matter where you live or if you're on the road, if you're traveling and the USA Today arrives at your door, that's what you'll see. Baghdad airport swarmed, regime's power diminished, and then it's the weekend edition of USA Today, so they always play the sports pretty high in the Final Four. It's just one of those things. I hope you all out there who are sports fans have gotten a chance to spend some time thinking about that too. It's not life in fact goes on. The Boston Herald, a terrific picture, and the headline is "Give It Up" in the Boston Herald. The picture of some surrenders going on. I'll hold that up for you a little bit. And confident Bush vice closing in on Saddam Hussein. The president visited the Marines today. San Francisco Chronicle had a guest on the program from the Chronicle a little earlier. U.S. attacks airport in fight for capital. We'll go through pretty quickly here, so stay with me. The two papers in Detroit. The Detroit News first, for no particular reason. U.S. tightens vice on Saddam's regime, and also the story of a local radio station over here getting fined because their shock jocks shocked a bit too much. Detroit Free Press, the other key airport seized, so they made that in theirs. The Red Streak, which is one of the two editions of the Chicago Sun-Times, publishes Lights Out, and the Chicago Sun-Times itself, U.S. reaches airport, Baghdad in the dark, and the weather, as we always try and point out in the Sun-Times, take cover. I guess it's going to rain tomorrow in Chicago, but you never know. We'll take a break. Our coverage continues with an update of the headlines from Darren Kagan after this.
Disciplined investing. It's not about following the crowd. At T. Rowe Price, our independent research means we're not deceived by every market ripple, and we don't chase every fad. Over 70% of our mutual funds beat their 3, 5, and 10-year Lipper averages. We have the experience to know what works, and the insight to find real opportunity. T. Rowe Price. Invest with confidence. It's all about efficiency.
It's your thing. Do what you want to do. We're going to the fair. I can't tell you who to sock it to.
It's my other set of wheels.
Gets me to class.
I'm going to see my boyfriend.
We went to the fair, all right.
Public transportation, wherever life takes you.
I'm Darren Kagan, live in Kuwait City. Let's take a look at the latest headlines from this hour, including some extraordinary images from a site very close to the Iraqi capital. Right now, they are battling Iraqis from Baghdad Saddam Hussein Airport, just a dozen miles from the heart of the city. Reuters quotes one top U.S. commander as saying, quote, "We control the airport." Iraqis have been trying to stop the American tanks by attacking with dump trucks, pickups, and so-called suicide buses loaded with Iraqi soldiers. Embedded CNN correspondent Walter Rogers says that commanders have told him there have been no U.S. casualties since the push toward the airport began. Southeast of Baghdad to the city of Kut now, where 2 U.S. Marines were killed in door-to-door fighting today. Other combat took place there as well, including one incident where some well-armed Iraqis staged an ill-fated charge on some coalition tanks. A commander says, quote, "They were mowed down." Experts trying to figure out whether recent footage of Saddam Hussein was shot before or after the war started are said to be focusing on details in the background. Specifically, they're trying to decipher some grainy images being broadcast on a television screen in the room. If they can determine exactly what they're looking at, they say they may be able to find out when it was aired. The father of rescued POW Jessica Lynch says his daughter is in great spirits after undergoing surgery on her back on Thursday. Gregory Lynch Sr. says that doctors have told him there is no evidence his daughter suffered any gunshot or stab wounds during her ordeal. Surgery on her broken limbs is scheduled for today. Aaron, back to you.
Darren, thanks. I think in the days ahead we'll learn more and more about what happened to Private First Class Jessica Lynch. Don't go away, Darren. Come back. Morning paper. Okay, I know you're not actually. You've got a lot of working day yet ahead. Morning papers from there.
Real quickly, this is from the Arab Times. It shows kind of how it's more difficult to be in the newspaper business these days. Baghdad battles in darkness. Of course, they're a few hours behind with what we're able to see live here on CNN. And then from the Kuwait Times, the headline, Baghdad's Dark Hour. And the picture showing near Basra, some Iraqi men are escorted and questioned by the army, the Desert Rats, as they entered the city in Basra. And then this picture right here, actually we're going to go to some video. This is a rally right here in Kuwait City that I covered myself last night, Aaron. Fascinating rally, thousands of Kuwaitis showing up to show their support for what is taking place. It's a pro-coalition rally. It was organized by the Kuwaiti Lawyers Association, also the Student Association. They brought out all these people. There was poetry readings, there were speeches, a number of signs, Kuwaitis from all ages. And just one other note, I've been getting a lot of viewer email, people wondering how things work here in Kuwait. I thought this was just a little interesting note, Aaron. Word of this rally spread through cell phones. Text messaging goes crazy here, and I can show you just from my own cell phone right here what we got the night before the rally. Your phone beeps, and you see this: to support Kuwait, let us gather at Flag Square from 5 to 7 p.m. on April 3rd, and that being last night, Thursday night, already Friday morning here in Kuwait City. So that's how you spread word of a rally in Kuwait.
And everyone does have a cell phone there. They may not all have Mercedes, so it sometimes seems that way, but they sure do all have cell phones.
They have the phone.
Thank you, Darren.
Yeah.
Darren and Anderson Cooper will anchor the rest of the morning starting in about a half an hour from now, and we hope you'll stay with them. Here is the scene, and the focus on the night has been Saddam International Airport, 12 miles outside the city of Baghdad, the capital. American forces have taken it. They have taken control of it, but that is quite different from saying there is no risk yet. But they do have control of the airport proper, it seems. This on a night that Baghdad itself spent in darkness, whether that was the coalition's doing, the Americans doing, or whether that was the regime's doing remains unclear. In any case, the focus has been this charge up to the airport itself to control it without destroying it, and now to work out from the airport to clear it out, to make sure it is safe. And it is clearly not yet safe. Our correspondent, Walt Rogers, who's traveling with the 7th Cavalry, and has been reporting for us, these are live pictures now, from about this location a few kilometers back, observed, 45 minutes or so ago, maybe a little less than that, a fight, a tank exchange in the area, and this is how he reported it to the world.
We know of at least one trying to punch its way through the U.S. 7th Cavalry's lines. Again, the tanks are rushing forward again to engage the Iraqi tanks. The U.S. tanks generally have longer range on their guns, so before the Iraqis get within threatening distance, what we're seeing, of course, is them being taken out like the hulk of the burned-out tank and the armored personnel carrier we have been showing you. Michael?
He was broadcasting. The Michael he referred to as the CNN International anchor he's conversing with when he reported this a few minutes back. And they were having some sort of exchange. There's
well,
Walter again.
I hate to contradict my dear colleague Nick Robertson, but we have seen civilians as we've traveled north of the Euphrates and throughout much of the day and evening last night. The Iraqis are staying fairly close to their homes, even though the Iraqi soldiers are using those homes as screens. Women hanging their washout signs, and we can see last night at dusk, just after a very heavy firefight, we could see an Iraqi shepherd herding his sheep back into a sheepcote or a small corral of some sort. So while some of the Iraqis may have left their homes, I suspect many others haven't had a place that they can go. And despite the fighting around them, many of them are staying very, even though the Iraqi irregulars, the Iraqi military irregulars, are trying to use their homes as cover, if you will, screens to protect them. Michael?
Again, this was how Walt Rogers reported it on CNN International. There are a number of CNN networks, and they don't always carry the same programming at the same time. Sometimes they do, and CNNI is seen around the world.
I'm not exactly sure what you're looking at now. If you're seeing a smoldering vehicle, that is an armored personnel carrier, which was taken out about 3 hours ago. It was part of the company of vehicles which came in the direction of the 7th Cavalry. The shooting you hear over my left shoulder, about 40 meters away, is the 25 millimeter gun on a Bradley fighting vehicle. We can see it shooting back to our left. Back to our left are some farm buildings.
And the sound breaks out there. I don't know if that's the end of the report or if Walt's going to be able to join us. But all of these are live pictures. Now you see some movement in the area. Walt, how long ago did you file that report for CNNI?
I guess about 45 minutes, but within the past 2 minutes, we've been under fire again. I heard an RPG just whistling in the air above our heads. Of course, it was traveling so fast we couldn't see it, but whoever fired that had to be closer than 700 yards to where we are, because 700 yards, 700 meters is the approximate range of the RPGs. And then another shot whistled over our heads just a few seconds ago. So the 7th Cavalry continues to be under fire. About 45 minutes ago, the Iraqis launched yet another tank attack against the 7th Cavalry. It was a bit of a surprise. At least one tank up in the distance is burning. I can see a great big billowing cloud of black smoke. And then off to our left, there were a number of other tanks. We've since been told that in the past hour, the 7th Cavalry has on its own knocked out 7 Iraqi tanks and armored vehicles. This in a rather serious fight. You could hear some of the shooting in that previous report I filed with CNNI. The Bradley fighting vehicles using their tow wire-guided missiles against the Iraqi tanks, and of course then the main battle tanks that the 7th Cavalry has shooting away at them. But again, in the last half hour, 6 Iraqi tanks knocked out. The Iraqis are not out of business, however. Again, within the past 2 minutes, we have heard RPGs firing right over our heads. You can hear them just going right over the heads. We don't know how high up they are, but it's a fairly low trajectory. Additionally, the 7th Cavalry continues to hold its position. Overnight, it claims to have killed over 400 Iraqi soldiers, and some of those in suicide attacks on the convoy. There was an earlier Iraqi convoy armored column that moved against the 7th Cavalry. Again, a combination of the 7th Cavalry tanks and armored vehicles in combination with the U.S. Air Force took out 10 Iraqi tanks. So by my count, at least 16 Iraqi tanks and armored vehicles have been killed, is the word the Army uses, within the last 3.5 to 4 hours. Aaron?
At what sort of distances are these battles taking place? Are you talking a quarter of a mile, a half a mile, 3 miles? What are we talking about?
Quarter of a mile sometimes, sometimes farther, but we have seen some of the Iraqis come up to within 100 meters of the road before they were shot down. We can see more tanks coming up the road behind us now. They'll pass through our frame in a few minutes, but this continues to be a hostile and hot free-fire zone. Aaron?
Well, it's pretty evident by what's been going on and just what we can hear. And this has been going on now for at least the last 4 hours, right?
That's correct, although I think there was sporadic fighting prior to that throughout the night here. We could see mortars going out. As a matter of fact, we parked our vehicle about 50 yards, half the length of a football field from a 120 millimeter mortar battalion, and when that thing goes off, the ground shakes, and the 120 millimeter mortars were shooting all night long for all intents and purposes. And as I say, it's been a running fight. Intermittent somewhat, but when they're shooting, it's very, very intense. Aaron?
And no casualties to report with the people that you've been traveling with now for more than 2 weeks, the 7th Cavalry. We see some of the tanks moving.
That's correct. That's correct, Aaron. To the best of our knowledge, and we check regularly, there have been no casualties with the U.S. Army 7th Cavalry, certainly not with the Apache troop, the troop with which we've been embedded. A troop is a company-size unit. The Army has, because of the increasing number of tanks the Iraqis are sending down the road in our general direction, just reinforced with yet more tanks and another fighting vehicle. So, again, the situation here remains I don't want to say threatening, but the Iraqis have not stopped sending tanks or suicide vehicles in the general direction of Apache troop for the last 4+ hours. Aaron?
Walt, hang on. General Wesley Clark joins us on the telephone tonight. General's been traveling, but has been paying attention. General, good to hear your voice.
Nice to talk to you, Aaron. I'm just amazed. I'm watching this shot that Walt Rogers is showing us here. And I recall a couple of weeks ago when we talked about this moment might arrive when we'd actually see these troops under combat. This is an incredible moment to watch an armored battle like this in progress.
It seems in some ways, General, like it was months ago. It was 2 weeks ago that we watched this group, Apache group, come in across the desert, those grainy pictures moving across the desert. And there was a sense of, I wouldn't say excitement, it's probably not the right word, but adrenaline certainly was flowing as they crossed the border. And now we see them close to the end of their journey. They're just 12 miles or 14 or so miles from the airport. You want to comment now on sort of where we are, General, what we might expect in the next day or 2 days or 3?
Well, this is... I guess you'd call this moderate resistance. As they're moving up the road, what we haven't been able to see is a well-prepared defensive position. Presumably, we're dealing with the tanks and the infantry vehicles and infantrymen who've escaped the pounding from the air. Perhaps these vehicles were camouflaged back in buildings or under trees and they couldn't be seen. But what's striking to me is the deliberate pace of movement, the skill of the troops in the 3-7 Cav in dealing with this enemy, the fact that they're observing, they're overwatching each other, and their gunnery is very, very good.
We've got a couple of minutes here before we have to break away. Do you have any sense that this is the last major armored resistance that the Iraqis can put up, or might we expect to see more of this over the next several days?
I think it's really unpredictable, Aaron, because tanks in street fighting in cities can be enormously powerful. And it would be surprising to me if there aren't some armored vehicles that have been pulled back into Baghdad. On the other hand, the collapse of these Republican Guards divisions has been sufficiently rapid that we just can't predict what kind of level of resistance we would see in Baghdad. Maybe it'll be prepared, maybe it'll be really tough, but maybe it won't be. And so I think this is a case where, as this squadron is doing, our troops have to advance, prepared to fight. They're doing reconnaissance in force. If they get through without a fight, then they get through. If they have to fight, they've got all the wherewithal to do it. And we probe, we exploit, and we push until we finish this conflict.
General, stay on the line, if you will. We're glad to hear from you. We'll also put one more voice now into the mix. Martin Navius is a defense analyst for the Center of Strategic Studies at King's College in London. It's good to have you with us, sir. You care to take a stab at at the question of the moment, which is how well and how, with how much discipline will the Republican Guard fight the end game?
Well, the one thing that we do know is that in the last war, in the 1991 war, the Republican Guard stood and fought. They were deployed around about Basra, in the south of the country. They were hit slam on by American and British armor together with air power, and they didn't collapse. They stood their ground, they fired back. In some instances, in a number of small engagements, they actually advanced under severe fire. And they only surrendered once their equipment had been destroyed. So our past experience of these elite units is that they won't just throw up their hands, and they will stand and fight. The question is, what will they do if they are deployed in cities where they can defend themselves and they can put themselves into good positions?
And what do you think they'll do?
Well, it all depends how successful the bombing was. Now, clearly the Republican Guards, the Hammurabi and the Medina Division were deployed against the 3rd Infantry, the cavalry, and the cavalry, but they're not there anymore. The question is, have they been destroyed by bombing, or have they withdrawn into the city? And if they have withdrawn into the city, was it an orderly, planned withdrawal, or was it a rout? Now, on the basis of our past experience with the Iraqi Republican Guard, and on the basis of our past experience of bombing, we must suspect that at least some elements of these elite units have withdrawn into the cities. And on the basis of a strategic analysis, it makes no sense for the Iraqis to stay in the open and engage the Americans in any large numbers. Their strongest position must be to draw the Americans and the Allies into the cities and to fight them there. It will give them the best chance. And I suspect there will be some members of the Republican Guard, and certainly many members of the Iraqi Special Republican Guard that wish to fight.
General Clark, weigh in on that. The Special Republican Guard is quite different. It's more of a militia or enforcers or thugs or people very loyal to Saddam, but not especially well trained in military tactics.
I think the odds are that there will be a fight in the city. It's been surprising to me that there was as much equipment left in the open by the Republican Guards and vulnerable to our air power as actually happened. But apparently some is left, and it would be surprising if there weren't a fight in Baghdad. If Saddam really is missing in action, if he really is not there, if the bombing campaign worked well, if we continue to grind away at their command and control and disrupt them, maybe we can undercut the resistance. But some of these guys really are hardcore. They've committed a lot to the regime. And even though the Iraqi military is not in the kind of pristine condition it was in 1990-91, a lot of the leadership is no doubt the same. And so I think we have to be prepared for a tough fight.
Mr. Navius, it strikes me, with what little I've learned, I suppose, or as much as I've learned over the last couple of weeks about military strategy, the Americans have a couple of choices to make, and the one they seem to be wanting to make is a slow, methodical taking of the city rather than a kind of headlong, blow-it-away Dresden taking of the city. Is that your view, or do you see it differently?
Well, no, I agree with you, Mr. Brown. I think the Americans will wait for a build-up of their forces. They need more heavy infantry to come up to Baghdad. They need to surround the city properly. And they can look to the British experience in the south of the country at Basra. What the British are doing around Basra is a slow and I believe subtle and sophisticated technique to squeeze the Iraqi resistance in that city. The British have adopted a policy of what they call raid and aid. That is, they are mounting swift operations into the city to locate and neutralize Iraqi positions, while at the same time they are working on the hearts and minds of the Iraqi people. I mean, one of the major problems that the British are encountering in Basra is the experience of the 1991 war.
Right.
The Iraqis civilian population just do not believe that we are going to be there and protect them against Saddam Hussein. And by working both the hearts and minds and the military campaign, slowly but surely the Iraqis' control of that city is being reduced, and they will be removed. This, I think, is probably better than, as you say, a headlong rush with all that would involve for civilian and American casualties in Baghdad.
General, Walt Rogers can hear you. You always see the picture somewhat differently than we do with your experienced eye. Anything you want to ask, Walt?
Well, Walt, we're looking in only a single direction here, and I would assume, of course, that there's a battle that's going on a broader than a one-tank front. And so there must be some mutual support between these vehicles. We've got helicopters overhead. We've got all of our combat elements engaged here, do we not?
Yes and no, General. Your prescience in reading the situation has been spot on. We do need to say, however, this is more than a single tank-on-tank. This is a troop which, as you know in the cavalry, is a company of tanks, a company of fighting vehicles. I have to be careful about the number of vehicles involved, but there is coordinated engagement by all vehicles, such that when the Iraqis sent out a counterattack about an hour ago, 6 tanks were put out of existence very, very quickly. Having said that, we are not seeing the Kiowa reconnaissance helicopters, and the 7th Cavalry is not getting any support from the Apaches. And this goes to the point of what you were discussing a few moments ago. The closer this unit pushes into Baghdad, the more the resistance becomes. It's not the Republican Guard units, but the Iraqis are fighting, and fighting very strongly, setting up ambushes alongside the road. And as you get close to the suburbs of the city, the Army is very concerned. The Iraqis are going to set up surface-to-air missiles, shoulder-fired missiles in apartment buildings and other buildings. So consequently, they're keeping the helicopters out. There is coordination. This is your standard cavalry troop moving forward, or at least holding its position, which is its assignment. But again, no helicopters. It's simply too dangerous the closer you get to Baghdad for those helicopters. Again, confirming what you have been suggesting, that there's going to be the devil to pay of a street fight as these units get closer. Aaron?
Walt, thank you. General, if you can hang around for another couple of minutes, we'll get some thoughts from you before we end our stay here. We need to take a break first. Our coverage continues here on CNN in just a moment.
CNN tomorrow, the coalition closes on Baghdad. Will Iraq launch chemical or biological weapons or even attack its own people? We'll measure the real threat. American Morning with Paul Azan. CNN tomorrow, 7 Eastern. CNN tomorrow as the battle for Baghdad begins, live at Central Command, plus the latest from the front lines, only on Larry King Live. CNN tomorrow, 9 Eastern.
Don't you love nurseries pollen? Look at that runny nose and those itchy eyes.
Yeah, ragweed, it doesn't get better than this.
Seasonal allergies live to make you miserable, but Allegra is specifically designed to block the histamine that triggers so many symptoms. Maybe that's why it's the #1 prescription antihistamine.
Looks like our little garden party's over.
You can thank Allegra for that.
For people 12 and over, side effects are low and may include headache, cold, or back pain. Ask your doctor about Allegra.
Allegra schmalegra.
Allegra. So much relief for so many symptoms.
Look, Steph. It's adorable. Hi there. What kind is it?
It's a mix, actually. Part charcoal, part gas.
Does it do any tricks?
Yeah. Actually, it switches from gas to charcoal in just a few seconds.
Listen, Steph and I are having a party tonight. Why don't you stop by?
The Charbroil 2-in-1 Charcoal Gas Grill. It's man's new best friend.
What a chick magnet!
CNN, the most trusted name in news.
We're going to step aside here for Darren Kagan and Anderson Cooper to take you through the rest of the morning. General Clark will join us again tomorrow. We'll leave you with the day, at least our portion, a busy and dangerous day for coalition forces across Iraq, and by extension, of course, the correspondents who are embedded with them. Here's a sample of the work our correspondents filed today.
believe our cameraman Charlie Miller is pointing in the direction of a T-72 Iraqi tank, which is still burning slightly. It was knocked out within the last 2 hours. Behind that is a BMP, an armored personnel carrier. There's an Iraqi soldier lying dead in the road by the BMP, and another one who's was killed in the turret of his T-72 tank. It's dawn here in Iraq, in the suburbs of Baghdad. We are not far from the Baghdad airport, the Saddam Hussein airport, and for the last several hours there has been an attempted counterattack by an Iraqi tank company. It was a bad decision, as one U.S. Army soldier told us. 400 Iraqis made a very bad decision in the last 24 hours. That bad decision was that they came out and tried to tackle the U.S. Army's 7th Cavalry.
We are reporting to you out in central Iraq. Last time, let me tell you what happened. The 1st Battalion, 7th Marines were able to secure Al Numaniya Air Base. That was formerly an Iraqi Air Force base. It is safe to say no longer in the hands of the Iraqis, now under the control of coalition forces. And since that time, the Marines continue to push on. What is happening right now is there is a heavy barrage of outgoing artillery fire, this coming from the Marines themselves. The U.S. Marines have now secured the key city of Al-Qut. It was the Baghdad division of the Republican Guard that was headquartered in this particular region. However, no indications of heavy fighting, but certainly if you take a look over here, all the indications of a clear U.S. military Marine buildup.
We have some exclusive pictures. Our cameraman Greg Danilenko just went out with one of the companies of soldiers out here where they found a weapons cache right in the middle of a school. Take a look at these pictures. They're really going to shock you. Acting on a tip from some people here in the city, they went to this school. They didn't know whether it was just going to be weapons or whether they would find some Fedayeen fighters inside the school as well. Well, they didn't find any Fedayeen fighters, but they certainly did find a lot of weapons, a lot of RPG rounds, a lot of mortar rounds, just a lot of weapons in general.
These are the bombs that are used on F-16 aircraft. These are called ABU-10s. They are made in Oklahoma, but they come to the Persian Gulf disassembled, and this is where they have to do the assembling at this bomb dump at this base near the border of Iraq. And this is Airman First Class Whitney Howery, actually sitting on the bomb, assembling it. Thanks for joining us. What are you doing right now?
I'm installing the fuse initiator.
Okay, now that's fuse initiators right there, you're saying. And what does that do?
It initiates the fuse that we've installed in the rear of the bomb.
How did you get in this work assembling bombs?
I chose the career field of ammo.
Is there a risk to it?
Not really.
You don't feel any danger when you're sitting on a bomb like this that you're assembling?
No, not until we get it completely assembled.
Then you feel it?
Just a little bit.
It's been an interesting experience for me. Certainly being a journalist, also a doctor, a neurosurgeon. When I spent some time with the Devil Docs earlier, one of the things that they had told me was they didn't have any neurosurgical capability, and they said if a patient were to come in that needed such an operation, would I be willing to help? They asked me that question. Today, that actually happened. It was just a few hours ago. They came up to me and said a 2-year-old child has a gunshot wound or a shrapnel wound of great significance to the head. Would I be willing to come take a look at the patient and take the patient to the operating room? Medically and morally, I thought that was the right thing to do. This child was in what we call in the medical lingo extremis, meaning at the time that I saw the patient, a few minutes really only to live. The outcome of the operation was that the child did die after the operation, despite our efforts, but this is something that we attempted to try and save the life of this child through the operation. I was asked to help out medically and morally. I thought it was the right thing to do.
Bang & Olufsen relies on HP technology to produce and distribute products that bring the world perfect sound.
In a sea of sameness, how do you pick a financial advisor who's right for you? Do you want one who works for the biggest company or the smallest? Do you want one with the most impressive office or the most elaborate website? Or do you simply want one who listens to you, like you are the only investor in the world? Raymond James, you first.
I'm Darren Kagan, live in Kuwait City. Let's take a look at the latest headlines. U.S. forces are moving ever closer to Baghdad, and they are using heavy armor and air support to punch through Iraqi defenses. American tanks are moving through the suburbs of Baghdad. Our Walter Rogers is embedded with the 7th Cavalry. He reports that Iraqis attempted an ambush, but it did little to slow down coalition forces. Reuters quotes an U.S. Army officer as saying Saddam International Airport is under coalition control. That is 12 miles from Baghdad. The Pentagon says there has been no damage to any of the runways. U.S. intelligence analysts believe that appearances on Iraqi TV by Saddam Hussein were likely taped before the war, but a CIA spokesman told CNN that a definitive conclusion had not been reached. Intelligence officials also cautioned that even if the tapes are old, it does not mean Saddam is dead. Congress has approved a package of nearly $80 billion to finance the initial cost of the war, bolster anti-terrorism efforts, and help the airline industry. More than $60 billion of the packages is earmarked for the Pentagon. Funding bills passed unanimously in the Senate and a large margin in the House. U.S. investigators are looking into a possible friendly fire incident that left one U.S. soldier dead and several others injured or missing. U.S. Central Command says that an Air Force F-15 fighter bomber was involved. Also, investigators are looking into the downing of a Navy F-18 Hornet jet over Iraq. Officials believe that plane may have been shot down by a U.S. Patriot missile. U.S. Special Forces conducted a late-night raid at one of Saddam Hussein's palaces about 50 miles north of Baghdad. CENTCOM says that no Iraqi leaders were captured in the raid, but important documents were recovered. Coming up this hour in CNN's coverage of the war in Iraq, more on the battle for Baghdad. Fighting continues near the Iraqi capital. We're going to take you live to the front lines for the very latest. Culture clash, tense moment, says U.S. troops confront a chaotic crowd. We'll show you the peaceful ending. And embedded with the devil docs, the war caught up with our Dr. Sanjay Gupta in a very personal way. He'll share that story just ahead.
You are looking at a live picture just outside Baghdad. Burned out Iraqi tanks litter the road as U.S. forces reach the outskirts of the city, taking Saddam International Airport, and President Bush says, quote, tightening the vice on the Iraqi regime. Good morning. It is Friday, April 4th. From CNN's global headquarters in Atlanta, I'm Anderson Cooper along with Darren Kagan in Kuwait. Good morning, Darren.
Good morning to you, Anderson. It is 2 a.m. on the East Coast where you are, 10 a.m. here in Kuwait, 11 a.m. in Baghdad. That is where Operation Iraqi Freedom is now in day 16. We have a lot of news this hour, but Anderson's going to get us started with the latest on coalition forces moving into Baghdad at this hour.
It is,
Anderson.
Darren, it's going to be a very busy hour indeed. Coalition troops have moved into the suburbs of Baghdad where the streets are littered with burning Iraqi military armor. American troops have been battling Iraqi forces for control of Saddam International Airport. There you see a graphic. And Reuters quotes a U.S. Army officer as saying the airport is under coalition control. It is just 12 miles from Baghdad. U.S. forces are closing in from both sides. The Marines are covering the east while the Army is coming from the south and west. Now, the push began with U.S. forces breaking through southern Iraq, working their way north to the rivers. The 1st Marine Expeditionary Unit led the charge across the Tigris to the east. Meanwhile, the 3rd Infantry with the 7th Cavalry moved along the Euphrates and through Karbala. The 101st Airborne took control of Najaf and has supported the Western Run. Coalition forces also control 2 air bases in the west, and Special Forces troops are assisting the push from Kurdish-controlled territory in the north. A lot happening on the ground for us to cover. We want to go now to Walter Rogers, embedded with the Army 7th Cavalry. Walter, what's the latest?
Hello, Anderson. We're showing you now live pictures of the overnight carnage, the toll taken by the U.S. 7th Cavalry of an Iraqi armor column as it tried to overrun the 7th Cavalry. Obviously, it met with no success. The vehicle in the foreground is a Soviet vintage Iraqi T-72 tank. It was knocked out with relative ease by nothing heavier than a Bradley fighting vehicle. Behind that, still smoldering, an armored personnel carrier. In the far distance, we can see the lines, perhaps a half a kilometer up the road, less than half a mile up the road. We can see the lines of the 7th Cavalry drawn across this approach to Baghdad. Of course, we can't say exactly where we are, but we are within just a few kilometers, less than barely miles from the Iraqi International Airport, the Baghdad International Airport. But there was the devil to pay overnight. The Iraqis came with those tanks that you can see in front of us in the armored vehicles. 10 tanks came roaring down the road, trying to overpower the 7th Cavalry. The 7th Cavalry's firepower, aided by night vision goggles, also with the assistance of the U.S. Air Force, took out 10 tanks of the Iraqis. That stopped them in their tracks. And then less than an hour and 20 minutes ago, right where I'm standing, very close by, the Iraqis tried yet another end run around the 7th Cavalry, trying to probe the flank. Again, 6 armored vehicles were taken out, a few tanks, a few armored personnel carriers, again, stopped dead in their tracks. It has been a long night here. There was heavy bombing of Baghdad, and in the early morning hours, the air in the Baghdad suburbs was choked with acrid smoke from the U.S. bombing. Anderson?
Walter, just judging from these pictures, I'm assuming you have stopped. What is your current status now, if you can say?
Well, it was not the function of the 7th Cavalry to go charging up to the airport or to go charging into the city. It was given an assigned position on a map to hold, and that is its position. It is protecting the flank of the other units, the larger units of the 3rd Infantry Division, which are somewhat to the east of us. And again, the 7th Cavalry is holding a checkpoint along a road should the Iraqi army come out in any great strength with its larger numbers of tanks, try to overrun the 3rd Infantry Division. We've not seen any maneuvers on that scale at all. What we've seen basically is one company of tanks coming out shortly before dawn, Baghdad time, being taken out. Again, one of the officers with whom I spoke said that they killed at least 400 Iraqi soldiers. Those would be infantrymen dismounts traveling with those Iraqi tanks. And the shooting is fairly consistent. Again, constantly over our shoulders, we're hearing machine gun fires and exploding ammunition aboard the knocked out and now burning Iraqi tanks. Anderson?
So the movement, we're seeing a tight shot of the tank that is in the distance. I'm taking it that is the 7th Cavalry tank, yes? It seems movement on the top of it.
Let me just check the picture on that, and I'll let you know. Yes, that's 7th Cavalry that you're seeing in the distance, and they're out in front of us. Between them and us are the burning Iraqi vehicles. Some of them were smoldering for hours. One you can see has been smoldering for 4.5 to 5 hours. Now they were knocked out of action almost immediately when the 7th Cavalry came upon them. But beyond that, as you point out, there is the perimeter of the M1A1 main battle tanks along with the Bradley fighting vehicles, both of which have shown themselves splendid.